Hey, good Thursday morning, everybody. Bam Weather Meteorologist Brett Waltz here, giving you a long-range forecast update, guys. Hope y'all are doing well today. Have a fun video today, really going to break down the pattern as we work throughout the rest of February and into March. And I want to talk about another potential sudden stratospheric warming event, a full breakdown of the polar vortex that data is trying to pick up on as we work into later next week, and the influences that it could have for the rest of February and potentially into March as well. I really worked hard this morning on trying to look into research that's been done, analog years, to give you all the best picture of how things are going to evolve over the next several weeks. I do want to start out, though, with the short term, guys. If we take a look at the current radar, we actually have some snow on the radar this morning across parts of the northwestern plains, across parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, rain all the way up into Canada here, guys, up into Minnesota. This storm system surging in mild air across a good portion of the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. And actually with that, if we turn on our severe weather threat here, we have a marginal threat for severe weather all the way up into Milwaukee and Madison, Wisconsin, including the Chicago metro area here, guys. A small area, but certainly rare for February 8th to be dealing with severe weather potential. And this includes all modes of severe weather. A small low-end tornado threat, hail, wind, all three are a threat here. Again, it's a low-end threat. It's not going to be a widespread outbreak or anything like that. But if we turn on our future radar, I do think that there is the potential as we work later on into the day today for, a couple of storms that could be severe. It could produce an isolated tornado. If we kind of go through here, let's take a look. This is as we work into this evening and into tonight. You can see kind of the first wave that works in. And then it's as we work towards, I guess at this point, 5:30 Central Time, we start to get some of these cells to develop, maybe supercells. Like, I know, again, it's weird to say in the early part of February, but as these work through, again, an isolated strong wind gust, large hail, or even an isolated tornado, not 100% out of the question here as we work into the evening hours today. We also need to keep an eye on a storm system as we work into early next week. We get a front to move through, and I think that we need to watch out for maybe a risk for some kind of accumulating snowfall event as we work into late Sunday and into your Monday, kind of initially developing across Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri, parts of Arkansas as well. I'm going to show you the European model just as an example here. Don't take it verbatim. The model data still waffling around, still trying to get a handle on both the strength and the exact track of the storm system. But if I had to lean towards something right now, it would be the EPS and the European model. It's been the most consistent with some kind of light accumulating snowfall risk for the Ohio Valley as we work into your Monday. Here's a look at the latest EPS, the 6C run that just came in, guys. The probability of an inch or more of snow. It actually ticked these up a little bit with pretty decent probabilities of accumulating snow from Missouri, Arkansas. You could extend this back into Oklahoma and Kansas as well, through southern Illinois, central Indiana, and into parts of Ohio. So something we're going to be watching carefully. Again, still several days out from this, so I would expect changes. I would expect some wobbles here versus what current guidance has, but at the very least, the potential for something wintry as we work into early next week. Here's a look at our initial idea for accumulating snow potential. Now, no, I'm not calling it a winter storm. I'm not saying heavy accumulating snow or anything like this. This is just the potential for snow accumulations in general. Highest threat, again, further off to the southwest across parts of Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, but then still a threat to watch across the I-70 corridor here in the Ohio Valley. So something to watch here as we work over the next couple of days. Before that, guys, before we get to that, out ahead of that storm system, notable warmth, 70s all the way up today into parts of Oklahoma and central Missouri. 60s pretty widespread into the Ohio Valley tomorrow. Some record-breaking warmth possible across northern Illinois, Michigan, and into the northeastern portion of the country. And then we start to cool down here as we work into early next week, but really still lingering above normal for many areas even after that storm system. The bigger cool down will come as we work kind of beyond Valentine's Day. If we take a look at our temperature forecast over the next 2 weeks, I really don't have any major changes here. Everything's been rather consistent. There are some differences between the EPS and the GEFS and how cold that it will be in this week 2 time frame. The EPS is a little bit warmer or a little bit colder. GEFS is a little bit warmer, actually. I like the EPS. I think that it's probably pretty reasonable Maybe it trends a little bit warmer in the northeast U.S. than what it has right now, but I think the general idea of the northern tier of the U.S. being warmer with cooler air south and east is likely. Not going to be notable, not expecting it to be January levels. I know we've said that multiple times. I just want to continue to make that clear that it's going to be an above normal demand period, but it's not necessarily going to be substantial, record-breaking, notable cold, if you will. So I just kind of want to continue to hit that point for you all. In terms of precipitation, guys, you can see the main storm track over the next 7 days is going to be across the Mississippi Valley, the Deep South, still lingering drier than normal across much of the Midwest here, guys. But again, there are some storm systems, some weaker storm systems to keep an eye on. So we work into the week 2 time frame. Your subtropical jet, your core of your jet, is going to be down to the south. So probably decent precipitation across, again, the western U.S., Texas, down into Florida. Wouldn't be shocked if maybe there's some storm systems up the East Coast to keep an eye on in here, and then kind of a secondary storm track in the central part of the country, but drier than normal across the Ohio Valley, the Midwest. It doesn't mean that there can't be precipitation or there can't be snow. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some clipper systems that moves through in this February 15th, 21st time frame, but they're just not going to be moisture loaded. So don't get me wrong. Yes, it's drier than normal. It doesn't mean that it's completely dry in this time frame. In terms of the pattern beyond this, beyond the week 2 period, I want to talk the rest of the video about the polar vortex and what it's going to mean for the pattern as we work really into the start of the meteorological spring. If we take a look here, this is the GEFS forecast for the zonal mean winds in the stratosphere. And basically what this chart is just showing us is whether the polar vortex continues to be intact. If it goes below the 0 line, it means that there is a full breakdown of the polar vortex. It means the winds actually flip from westerly to easterly, which is what often can allow for blocking to set up in the high latitudes, higher pressure and colder air down into the mid latitudes. Now, in terms of this from a historical perspective, guys, we take a look here. We have only ever had a couple of full breakdowns of the polar vortex multiple times in a winter on record. This is very, very rare to have 2 polar vortex, sudden stratospheric warming events in one winter. In this particular case, guys, what's going to happen as the vortex breaks down is the main lobe is going to go over here into Asia. And so in terms of the coldest air, the coldest result from this pattern, it is going to likely be over here in Asia. In terms of the United States, again, it's going to allow for blocking higher pressure to develop over Greenland, higher pressure over the Arctic and parts of Alaska. And so you are going to get some cooler air to come down across the eastern half of the country. But the notable cold source, we just aren't going to have a big tap to, at least at the start. I don't really see a big change in this, but I do think it's worth watching. If we could split maybe a secondary lobe off here, some of the operational data trying to hint at that, that would at least open the door for a couple of days of some more notable cold risk. But I just don't think at this time I see enough evidence to support notable cold in the U.S. I think it's going to go over into Asia. Now, if we look at this from a historical perspective and look at all of the different situations that can happen with the polar vortex, there's a lot of possibilities, and it's not just as simple as polar vortex split, polar vortex displacement. There's a lot that goes into this, and you look at all these different regimes in terms of, your typical strong vortex displaced over the U.S., displacement over Asia, displacement over Greenland and the U.S., or just your full-on breakdown. This is the one that we're dealing with right now, is this cluster 5. There's a lot of different things to look at. If I look at this cluster 5, guys, historically, it is going to favor the coldest air to go over into Asia. And this is kind of exactly what I was just talking about in terms of, look, you can see, some cooler air here across the south and east U.S. There's going to be blocking, but the core of your cold, your more notable cold, the risk for record-breaking cold is going to go over to Asia in this case. On top of that, when you get the vortex to displace or split or completely break down, then there's all these different scenarios of what can happen in the troposphere based on where you start and where you're going. I looked through that. I determined that the second one, if I zoom in here, is going to be, let me zoom back out so you can see that a little bit better, is going to be the one that most resembles this upcoming period. And so this one in the middle is between 10 days before the warming and 10 days after the warming. And you can see it's going to favor a lot of blocking over Alaska and over Greenland, and you're going to get colder in the eastern U.S. We showed you that with our week 2 forecast, and that's likely to linger into the last days of the month. But what we need to watch is what happens after that. What happens, 10 days to even a month after the breakdown happens. And what starts to happen is you start to get this trough and cooler air to come back into Alaska. They're still blocking over Greenland, and so you can still have some cooler air for a time kind of in the eastern portion of the country. But with the cooler air returning to Alaska, eventually you are going to allow for warmth to come back here across the northern tier of the United States. I think that based off of the evolution of this particular breakdown of the vortex, that is what I expect to happen. If you take a look, again, right around the core of the breakdown, looks very similar to that analog. Ridge in Alaska, ridge in Greenland, ridge over the Arctic. Core of the cold goes over to Asia, but you still get cooler air across the eastern half of the country. If we look at a similar year, 2010, it's not perfect, but 2010 had a very similar breakdown of the vortex and a very similar negative NAO to what we're going to see coming up. The main difference between this year and 2010 is that the main lobe of the vortex, it went over into the U.S. And so the core of the colder period, right around the breakdown, was colder in 2010 than what we are going to get this year. However, I think that there is a usefulness of 2010 down the road. After the main impacts have passed, what are the lingering impacts? What happens 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks after the actual breakdown of the vortex? I think that it is 100% useful to look at 2010 as we work late February and into March for potential impacts down the road. Now, the vortex breakdown happened about a week earlier than what we're going to see it this year. And so if we look at the first week of March of 2010, here's what happened. Note the warmth coming back, more widespread across the northern and northeastern U.S. I think that's likely going to happen. However, because this year the vortex broke down earlier, I think that you're looking at the second week of March. And so March 8th to 14th is when you're going to start to push some warmth back in more widespread across the northern U.S. Still some cooler air south and east in here, but in terms of more widespread cold across the eastern and northern U.S., that's probably going to start to fade. As we go into the third week of March, again, we're lagged by about a week to 2010, so this would be closer to the 15th to the 21st. This is when you start to get more widespread, warmer than normal conditions to come back across the northern and eastern portion of the country, which looks very similar to what our current March outlook is. And so with all this in mind, guys, the takeaway that I want you all to have here is basically starting the 15th to the 21st of February, it's going to get cooler. Not notable cold, core of the notable cold goes into Asia, but cooler than normal, above normal demand. That idea likely lingers out through the end of February and probably the first week of March. So cooler air lingering east the first week of March. You work into the second week of March and we start to moderate. We start to warm up a little bit. And then by the middle part of March, I think that a warmer than normal pattern, similar to what our current March outlook looks like, is going to start to set up. And so, I don't really have any changes to this March idea right now. It probably starts off cooler than this. But as we work mid to late March, similar to 2010, similar to our overall analogs, we start to warm things up. So, guys, that's the overall progression that I'm seeing right now. I think this vortex breakdown allows the cooler air to linger into early March, but I do think that we can eventually warm things up as we work about a month or two, or a month and a half from now. Guys, that's all I have for today's forecast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great rest of your day.